a question about how does butch and femme roles in lesbian relationships fit into this whole discussion. And I do think that's quite a large issue to talk about at this point. So I think I do need to talk about it on FQT, and we'll do that in the future, except to say that I think butch and femme are gender identities. So I think if lesbians do either one of those things, they're doing a gender identity. And they are constructed and they are problematic, as heterosexual sex role stereotypes are as well. So no, I don't think they're defensible. That would be my position. And certainly they were completely rejected in the lesbian feminism of the 1970s here and in the States. From about 1970 onwards, women who'd been lesbians most of their lives, writing books and becoming feminists, totally rejected those roles. But again, as with roles in heterosexuality, the critique seems to have gone. Anyway, I'm happy to make that critique and draw all of these things together in the future, and I'd be delighted to do so. I've written quite a bit about it already, so if anybody wants to read, trigger warning, my autobiography, and I think probably Unpacking Queer Politics and so on. There's a lot out there by me on butch and femme already.
It's very good if we be a role model, and we are anti-gender, like we do not perform femininity, because then it's a crucial time at the moment that if there are young girls who are rejecting the gender stereotypes, the sex role stereotypes, the forced femininity, and there's nowhere to go, they feel like there's no option unless we show that there is an option, that you can do drug-free rejection of gender. You can be outside these gender stereotypes completely without having to take any drugs. I think it's a really powerful message. And I think that those role models, us role modeling that to younger women, that they can see that you don't have to perform femininity. And one of the problems, as we've been discussing, is that there is a real push for you either have to perform femininity by using pronouns, which essentially is a performance of femininity if you say your pronouns, if you have got pronouns. And if you do reject the whole gender sort of ideology by not performing femininity, sometimes you get gently pushed out of your job. And like Sheila says, you wouldn't be able to be a newsreader in Britain if you're not performing femininity by wearing revealing clothes and high heels. So it will be at a price that we reject femininity. But I think it's an incredibly powerful opportunity for us to undermine transgenderism and to reject patriarchy.
There was a lot in the WDI statement that ties into what all three of you talked about performing gender and how this relates to domination and subordination. I wanted to read specifically one paragraph that I think really relates from our statement. If we only focus on preventing people from performing the wrong gender based on their sex, we will lose on both fronts. We will fail to stop the oppression of all women and girls, including lesbians, and we will fail to eliminate transgenderism. Because if the system of male supremacy insists that all women and girls must be feminine and heterosexual, then some women and girls will find their sexual status to be intolerable, and they will seek to escape from their sex as they always have. So that I think that kind of sums up how we have to get to the root of eliminating these stereotypes from the bottom up, and not allow people to think that it'll be better if the girls just start acting like girls again.
I'm a scientist, and the best thing would be, a controlled experiment. Well, we can't do that. But the closest I know to it is that, I experienced a time in the late 60s and in the 70s, in a place, New York City, in the Village in Manhattan, where there were cohesive, separate women's, a lot of lesbians, but not exclusively, women's and gay male communities. If you were there, you got to see what happens in terms of sexuality when men have no women to constrain them, and when women are completely free of male influences. Straight men would come into this environment, and they really envied the way the gay men were having sex. Top, bottom roles, S&M, before it was unleashed to the general public as BDSM, having sex, is ejaculating at least once every day, more than once a day when possible, and each sex act would only take a few minutes, with men consistently making themselves freely available for sex with other men. No expectation or desire for affection or gentleness. Straight men wanted being with women to be like what gay men were doing. The lesbians and straight women who were among us were polar opposites in every way. And the straight women were envious and longingly wished that being with men was like what the lesbians were doing together. So of course, gay male sexuality was going to become the standard for all sexuality, because that's what men, gay or straight, want sex to be like. And first it was heterosex that was poisoned. Women used to be the restraining factor, up to a point in what was considered acceptable in straight sex. No BJs, no anal, certainly no BDSM. But now women who partner with men have no alternative, and they don't even realize that they've been groomed into accepting purely male sexuality as the norm. Even more tragic, I mean, for me as a lesbian, is a terrible influence that male sexuality has had on lesbians. Young lesbians take for granted the kind of aggression, role playing, etc., that has seeped in from male sexuality. It was a huge chasm, and unless you saw it, you don't realize it. Sheila did a good book in unpacking queer politics and talking about how that happened. I mean, I went through a lot of events going, what's wrong with this? But that is is kind of the crux of gender, is that the acceptable gender, the acceptable sex role stereotypes were gleaned from male sexuality, not just men being men, but from male sexuality, and everything about relationships between men and women, whether it was just men and women in relationships, or men out in the world with women employees, or or shop customers or something, was all devolved onto the gender roles, the sex role expectations of male sexuality.
I've noticed is that with the drag queen story time, what seems to be happening, or I get the feeling that drag queens and men are meant to be the teachers of femininity. So women, they've decided that we were not teaching our daughters well enough, properly, and schools weren't, how to be feminine. So we've got this rollout of drag queen story time and drag race or whatever on television. So we're now, women are being taught how to be feminine, which fits exactly what you've just said, through men and men's sexuality. And one thing that shocked me recently is a woman I know, or there were a few women together, they were talking about something, and then they suddenly started imitating drag queens, and they were sort of shyly doing it, but thinking it was hilarious fun. It was sort of naughty, but great that they were brave enough to say the extremely misogynistic, anti-women things that the drag queens were saying. And I sort of thought, wow, they've picked this up, and they think the role models have told them. So yeah, that's really horrifying.
It does seem that there are quite a few women involved in the discussion who actually very much reject the things that we've been saying today, and are actually quite angry about them. And I think perhaps one of the things that this shows us is the extent, unfortunately, to which women are actually constructed to believe that femininity is natural, and that they've, or indeed that they've perhaps chosen all of these things. But the way that women's minds are constructed, the mind bindings have worked. And I mean, I don't know any other way of explaining why women would become very cross and think that this is something we should not discuss, that we should actually, the rejection of femininity is naughty, it's not something we should do, and it's not something we should discuss. So I think it's interesting to try and work out why that would be the case, because these women are feminists, they're on our side, they're in our camp, there's no question, but they're very much rejecting. But the other thing that I wanted to say was, for women who want to reject femininity, where is the possibility? The whole society is constructed around it, pornography is constructed around it, everything that's on the telly, all the films, the culture is constructed around sexualized, very highly sexualized femininity. That is all that's out there. And that makes me think of something that I often say, but may be controversial, which is, for instance, that teachers in schools should not be permitted to wear the costume of femininity because they need to be role models for the girls and boys that they are teaching. They need to be showing that women can be free, that women can have freedom of movement, freedom of sitting, freedom of everything. If nobody's there to model it for girls, no women at all, anywhere in the culture, and certainly not in their schools. I've seen on television headmistresses in high-heeled shoes. Can you imagine that? That is so cruel, so vicious towards girls, that there would be headmistresses wearing high-heeled shoes, suggesting that this kind of torture is actually something that girls should emulate. So we actually desperately need role models. We need just something else in the culture, and there really isn't anything else in the culture right now.
Just my own experience, which might fit in with some of the women in the chat who are feminist and or really agree with a lot of what WDI Feminist Question Time comes up with, but wear sort of very feminine clothes or perform various bits of femininity. Is I've quite often in my life performed femininity, and I have done it quite often because I thought it would help me get a job. And it's slightly out of fear that, or maybe, just thinking I won't get away with it. I just need to look normal. I need to fit in. I don't, if they found out what I really think, which they'll see if I don't perform femininity, they won't give me a job. And then when the times when I've done less performance of femininity, it has been scary to do it, because I've thought, well, I'm going to get in trouble for doing this. People are going to turn on me. So I think that might be a thing. Well, that's my own experiences. I've been nervous about stopping performing femininity. The other thing is it possibly could be a bit of an addiction, a bit like once you do it, you're just addicted to it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely been my experience too, that I feel like I'm taken seriously at work the more that I perform femininity, and then it's kind of a habit and it's hard to break. And then to the point about role models, I think most of the female role models I can think of who I see as strong leaders, they're seen as leaders and taken seriously to the extent that they are capable of being like as brazen as men and kind of embodying the worst, some of the worst masculine stereotypes. And I don't really see that as a good role model either. So those are some of the issues I see.
But women who perform femininity, I find in the workplace, often they are performing for the patriarchy, so they're doing it to themselves. It's like sisters are doing it to themselves. They're saying, look, I'm a really true to the patriarchy. My first allegiance is the patriarchy. Look, I'm doing the femininity. I'm wearing these crippling high heels for myself, and I'm role modeling it to the children. Or to other people, young women. There you are, and then they get really taken very seriously. I think there's a lot of pressure on women to do it.
It is a lot of pressure. I mean, I don't have them on today, but I have earrings. I have lots of earrings. I got my ears pierced when I was, 16, like a lot of girls do. And my partner, who I met when I was 18 and was with for a long time, got me earrings as gifts. So I have, and she passed away, but I have all the earrings she gave me. So aside from the fact that it has personal significance to me, I know at work that I'm perceived differently when I wear earrings than when I don't. And we're not talking about the fact, we know that women are perceived differently, that we succeed in ways that, that we wouldn't if we didn't perform at least some aspects of femininity. The trick is if a woman gets to a point where she's the manager and can relax, those standards for herself and for all the women who work, who she supervises or who work for her, that is something we can do. That is a concrete something we can do. And it may not change the whole world right away, but it sure will change the atmosphere and the culture of that that group that she manages or supervises. And then if another woman manager sees it and sees, wow, these women are doing great, and they're not performing femininity, it just it passes on. It is one thing that we can do.
There's a thing in the chat here from Julia Long that says, I think I was taken more seriously for not performing femininity, because I took myself more seriously. And that's an interesting thing. And that's, you know, very optimistic. And I think I found that as well, that I was terrified of cutting off my long dyed hair and stopping wearing makeup, etc., etc. And when I did it, I thought, oh, I'm just going to get the sack. And then I didn't get the sack. And actually, I got quite a lot more respect. And I think it's that thing like, oh, she respects herself. She's going to take this space. She's not submissive. So I think there's a win as well. Not always, obviously, you might, but I think Julia's point is a good one.
That taking yourself seriously, that's really culturally infused. I mean, you know, when I talked about, you know, you're born a boy, and everything from day one is like, expect to succeed, you know, do whatever you can to get your way, be confident, you got this. All of that is perceived of as, you know, traditionally manly behavior. And it isn't. It's just something that a way that you can bring up your child, that, you know, expect to succeed, but without making them jerks about it.
Could I just go back to the point I was making before, which is about why so many women are finding this issue of femininity difficult now? If we think about the 1970s, when so many, you know, thousands and thousands and thousands of us throughout the Western world gave up the practices of femininity, it was easy because there was a movement, so there were so many doing it. There were thousands and thousands of young women giving up all of this stuff. So the critique was out there and it was possible to do it, and we were all criticizing it. That's not true now. We've got very, very, very serious, vicious enforcement of femininity now in a way that we didn't have then. And there was a unisex model in fashion then. You know, unisex was okay. Actually, there were men in the 60s in particular with long hair, which is, you know, something extraordinary, which of course isn't happening now. So I think it's just that now we've been in an absolute iron fist of femininity and masculinity. And so questioning it now just seems like something extraordinary, incredibly radical, over the top. It was just ordinary in the 1970s. Go to a feminist conference of 3,000 women, and they all looked fairly similar. You know, some women had long skirts, it's fair to say, and there were some women with long hair, but mostly we looked similar, whether heterosexual or lesbian. But there isn't that background now. So what we're saying here seems to be like, you know, shooting an arrow to the moon. It's just something so extraordinary, something so peculiar. But we've got to start talking about it, otherwise it's never going to get ordinary. It's never going to be ordinary for girls to give this stuff up.
I think also, I mean, there's a question in the chat from Kara Dansky saying, are panelists trying to police women's dress and use of makeup? And I would say it's not really policing, it's more encouraging and making the logical connections in my mind that, you know, when I thought about it, as I have often in my life, you sort of think, oh yeah, this is a very powerful thing that I can actually do. There are lots of things we can't really change, but one of the reasons it's such a good thing to think about and talk about and promote is that a lot of us can do it, even if it's just perform a bit less femininity. But rejecting femininity is such a strong, potent thing to do that I think that's one of the reasons we wanted to discuss this, is to sort of bring it into the arena. And also because of transgenderism being based upon that if you perform femininity, maybe you've got this gender identity. We're fighting this struggle. I think we'll be better at fighting the struggle. But I don't think it's really policing people. It's more encouraging women to think about it.
In the 1970s and subsequently, Black women have actually created a politics out of not having to iron their hair, use terrible straightening treatments that are dangerous, not having to whiten their skin. It's a politics. I think everybody understands that those practices come from racism, and it's a politics. And I've never seen the argument that that's about policing women and those discussions should not happen. So we're talking about the politics of appearance, which is politically constructed. And we have to be able to discuss politics.
Yeah, I'm not against discussion, but all I'm saying is that when when something like rankles and it's just like, oh, you're policing me, it's like, just start with just thinking, just start the discussion before you even jump into it saying, by gosh, why? Where did you get this idea from? Where did it come from? And maybe that's part of the discussion as well.